Hello, everybody. Recording live from somewhere. This is Zach Couples with episode number 42 of the Movement Debrief. And tonight, folks, we're going to have a phenomenal show. Perhaps one of the best, could be one of the worst, could be somewhere in the middle. Who knows, but it'll be phenomenal either way. We're going to talk about hip adduction versus hip abduction. What do you do to treat this? What do you do to treat that? What do you do to get both of those better? Who, what, where, when, why? I'm going to answer it tonight. We're going to talk about course takeaways, in particular, PRI course takeaways. What were my big three? And last but not least, we're going to talk about a personal favorite of mine, the abdominal draw-in maneuver. But before we do that, a little bit of housekeeping. Did you guys see my blog this last week? So this week's blog, what the heck was this week's blog? This week's blog was the Frequently Asked Questions blog, which basically I took every single one of my debrief answers that I have given in the past, and I put them in a catalog of sorts to help streamline the process so you don't have to listen to me blab for hours upon hours about random topics. So that was the post for this week. I hope you guys found it useful. Took me a while to do, so yeah, Mike was good, my G. There was that. Other housekeeping things. I haven't heard much more about Australia, but I think that's still going to be a thing. I'm talking with a couple other collaborators on that who will also be in Australia if you're going to be there. Stay tuned, because I think it's going to be pretty dope if we can get this to work out. Also, September 15th and 16th, people, in Seattle, Washington. There's going to be signups coming out soon. The Human Matrix is coming your way. It's a 2-day seminar where we're going to talk about all things variability, power, and capacity. It's going to be great. If you want to get your clients moving better, if you're a PT and you just don't understand the strength conditioning side of things as well, or if you're a trainer and you want to understand a little bit more of the PT side of things, because I think regardless of what your letters are, you need to know both. You should probably check out the Human Matrix. It's coming your way soon. Other housekeeping. That's really it. In terms of professional, well, there's also, I am in my second to last week in beautiful Page America. Yes, I'm going to be leaving Page America. It's been almost 10 months since I've been here. I think if my math serves me correctly, July, August, September, October, November, December. 10 months. 10 months I've been in Page. It's been a really good spot to work. I've learned a lot, gotten a lot better at certain things, found out where I need to get better at other things. It's been a really good place. It's been awesome traveling for the past 10 months. I was initially begrudgingly thinking about going into travel PT because I just didn't have any other options that seemed worthwhile at the moment, and I'm so glad I did. I'm going to be heading to California next. If you are near the Reno, Tahoe area, Susanville, California is where I will be. If you're there, hit me up, fam, and we'll be famming out and all types of stuff in NorCal. Go gamble and things like that. Side note about Reno, because Reno's about an hour and a half away. When I was a PT student, I did a clinical in Reno, and I was not the best with money at the time, and I gambled almost every weekend. So I'm glad I don't live in Reno, because I would probably have a gambling problem. But I live close enough that I can still gamble a little. Stay tuned. That's my life. That's my story. Weekend was good. I hope your guys' weekend was spectacular. And without further ado, let's debrief, shall we? First question comes from, who does the first question come from? First question comes from the unknown man or woman. The reason why they're unknown is because I forgot to clip their name. So I'm sorry if I forgot to clip your name. Whoever you are, thank you for asking this question. So in one of my past debriefs, I was talking about hip abduction, adduction limitations. I'll link that debrief in the show notes. If limited in abduction but not adduction, do abduction exercises. So when do you know what if limitation is due to being at end range or something like that. I may be skidding right now, but I could listen to a whole podcast on this topic. Well, the unknown question asker, I won't give you a whole podcast, but I will give you 1/3 of the debrief. Let's just talk about hip adduction and abduction. What do we think's going on? I'm going to tell you what I think's going on. So in order for you to understand what's going on with hip AB and adduction, you might want to get one of these bad boys, courtesy of Sawbones. Not an official sponsor, but if you want to give me money, Sawbones, I will more than happily take it. So this guy. Now, let's get a few things out of the way. I'm thinking about hip abduction and abduction in relation to how the ilium on the sacrum is moving. More specifically, this right here, your infrapubic angle, which guess what? Typically mirrors the infrasternal angle. If you want to learn more about that, I'll link them in the show notes. Now, caveat. The pelvis and the SI joint does not move this much. I get that. Millimeters we're talking here, people. What I think is going on, though, is the muscle actions may still be occurring in such a fashion that could potentially lead to some limitations more so than others. So when I'm thinking hip AB adduction, I'm thinking, how is this moving and what's going on down here in particular? So I didn't buy the femur because I'm still trying to earn a little bit more money before I go get the femur portion, because this was like $65 and the pelvis with the femurs was like almost $400. I'll make that happen at some point, but just not yet. If this is my femur, and let's say I adduct said femur, watch this. The femur gets much closer to the ischial tuberosity. Do we all agree with that? And if I abduct the femur, it goes much farther away from the ischial tuberosity. Watch this. Watch me adduct the femur. Ooh, this is going to be tough, but we're going to make it happen. If you imagine there's a femur out here, if I do this, that's still relative adduction because the femur is getting closer to the ischial tuberosity. So that action, that is relative adduction of the femur. If I want to abduct the femur, watch this. Boom. See what I did? I just moved this attachment further away from the femur. Abduction. So what you could potentially be limited in either of these scenarios has to do, in my humble opinion, with whether you are more this or whether you are more this. Let's talk about that a little bit more. So if I have a narrow infrapubic angle, which the way that happens is, guess what? Flexion, abduction, external rotation. Or from the side, we talked about this before, guys, anterior rotation of the innominate, right? That is going to see a narrow infrapubic angle. Can you see that? As I flex, abducts, and externally rotate, this narrows. When this happens, what's going to occur is you are going to get a relative bony impingement of the acetabulum on the femur when you try to go into adduction. Because this, remember guys, this, when the femur adducts, it gets closer to the lower portion of the pelvis. So if this is too far away, I can't go as far into adduction. So you get bony impingement because this goes forward. Because this is farther away, you're also going to get some increased tonicity or some shortening of some of the posterior structures of the hip. Because these guys on the backside, if I pull away or if I bring this together, you get these structures which cross here, so your posterior rotators, become a little bit shorter. Now, if you look at an anatomic investigation of the Ober's test research article, which I can link in the show notes, you will see that a couple limiting factors for the Ober's test would be posterior capsule, posterior rotators of the hip gluteus medius. And so if my infrapubic angle is narrow, those guys are going to be a little bit more concentrically active, thus also contributing to the range of motion limitations at the femur when I test adduction. So guess what you got to do? If I'm a narrow infrapubic angle and I have a positive adduction test, however you test hip adduction, I don't care, just test it. I need to do this. I need to open up the lower portion, the pelvic outlet. I need to make the infrapubic angle wider. Now, what could do that? I'm glad you asked. There's these muscles that attach on the inside right here. That looked kind of provocative. I'm sorry about that, but they're right here, called your hip adductors. And if you contract those bad boys, what that's going to do is that's going to allow this to open up, because the adductors pull this apart. It would be your ischial-condylar adductor. It could be a lot of different things, right? All these, like adductor magnets, all of them that attach up here, relatively pull this apart and relatively allow the pelvic floor to ascend, right? Because if this is in this position, it's a little bit ployed out. So you need hip adduction. So if you have someone who's got a narrow infrapubic angle, and the way that we're surmising that would be a narrow infrasternal angle plus a positive Ober's test or whatever hip adduction test you utilize, what you need to do is you need to squeeze your knees together as hard as you can so this infrapubic angle widens. Get the adductors. And typically what I will do is, if I can, or I will start with some position in which the hip is flexed and try to get the adductors that way. I found that to be very successful initially. So squatting variations, the diamond bear exercise, and I'll link these in the show notes. But if you put something between your knees, you squeeze that hard with the hip flexed, a lot of times they'll get your hip adduction measure to improve. But what if that's not enough? What I will do then is I will go from a hip flexed active adduction position to a hip extended adduction position. Make it a little bit more challenging. You got to pick one of those two positions of the hip. Because, for example, if you're utilizing an Ober's test and you can, let's say, can adduct, and you do something with the hips flexed and drive adduction, you get a little bit, but you still got that last little bit of adduction you need to get left. Well, this position, when I'm testing, the hip is extended. So it would make sense to me to put the hip into extension in some type of activity and drive adduction that way to get this bad boy to open up. That's one of my rule of thumbs. Try the activity with the hip flex first because it's easier. And this is not just hip AD and abduction, but any hip measure. And then try with the hip extended if you don't get it then, because it's just a little bit more challenging. You're likely going to get a little bit more muscle activity, a lot of different things. So that would be what happens with hip adduction. So to summarize, narrow infrapubic angle likely limits hip adduction. You need adductor muscles to open that up and restore this. So this bone right here gets closer to the femur to allow for adduction. Now, abduction for these individuals. If my people who are adducted are narrow in their infrapubic angle, if I can't abduct, bam, they're wide. This gets much closer to the femur, so I can adduct like it's nobody's business, but I can't abduct. Why? Well, what muscle did I utilize to restore the narrow to a normal infrapubic angle? Well, if you were listening earlier, it would have been the hip adductors. So guess what? What if I go from this to that? Well, them bad boys are going to be on fuego. So because of the concentric orientation of the hip adductors, your adductor magnus, gracilis, all those bad boys, these guys are more on. I can't abduct because of their overactivity secondary to the infrapubic angle. So what do you got to do? You got to find something that gets you from here to here. What muscle could do that? I'm glad you asked. What I would use is something that could get these bad boys, the adductors, to chill. And what gets an adductor to chill? An abductor, my friends. So I'm going to use glute med to drive hip abduction. And what that will do is if I abduct the femur and I use the glute med, it's going to take my pelvis, which is here, and bring it there. Thus getting a normalization of hip abduction. Now, if you really want to kick it up a notch, Emeril Lagasse style, you could get even more fine-tuned by targeting either anterior or posterior gluteus medius. The measure you would have to look at would be hip internal or external rotation. Because what could possibly be happening is if I abduct the femur, see what I did there? If I attempt to abduct the femur by abducting the pelvic outlet, what could happen is only one portion of the adductor magnus could be creating a limitation in the abduction movement. So what you would have to look at is hip external and internal rotation. For example, if I have someone who is limited in hip internal rotation along with abduction, then the hamstring portion of the adductor magnus will be a little bit on fuego. And what I would need to do is find a portion of the glute med to get that to let go. So if I don't have IR, I essentially want anterior glute med in that position, acting as an internal rotator and abductor. So you would do activities where the femur is abducted in IR. Put them in the position that they can't get into, make sure they feel the relevant anatomy, and then you'll get your changes. Now on the flip side, if I have someone who is abducted and can't externally rotate, then what could be going on is I have a little bit more adductor portion of the adductor magnus, a little bit too active. And so what I would do in that case is get posterior glute med. So I might do an activity where the femur is more abducted and externally rotated. Same principle. Put them in the position that they can't get into, make sure they feel the relevant anatomy, and you ought to be in business. So to summarize abduction, the outlet's too open. Adductors on fuego. I need to use a gluteus medius to get those guys to chill, to allow for a normal infrapubic angle relationship, and that ought to restore hip abduction. That would be my spiel on the frontal plane mechanism, or at least the frontal plane measures of the hip, because after many discussions with Daddy O'Pops, Bill Hartman, I question if there is a true frontal plane mechanism, since I can't really just make this dude pure frontal plane. But that's for another debrief. Next question comes from Max. Max asks, ZC, I would love to hear your 3 biggest takeaways from all of your PRI courses. If you could combine them all and take 3 things away, what might it be? Max, that's a good question. I'll answer it for you. I thought a lot about this because I've taken a lot of the PRI stuff. Con Ed takers don't count. Takers don't. That's bad. I know I'm in the 20s, but I forget how many exactly. So I've taken a lot of their stuff. I've learned a lot from the Institute, even though I do things a little bit differently now. They've exposed me to a lot of very good principles. And I think the three big takeaways that I got from them are this. The first takeaway was appreciating that the people that we work with are not just a bunch of joints, separate joints. These are people. They're people who have multiple systems that can have multiple influences, either negatively or positively. You can have many different sensory systems. You can have endocrine system. You can have a lot of different things impacting an individual's presentation. Transcendent of physical therapy and performance. I mean, this is anything. This is any discipline. And I don't think I appreciated that as much until I dove into PRI, because they were integrating a lot of different systems, a lot of different disciplines in order to help people get better. And I'm grateful for that, because it's done some things for me. It's allowed me to appreciate that there are multiple system influences that we can intervene upon. And it's also helped me realize that there's a big hole in my game, in the sense that as a physical therapist alone, I need more people, or I need to develop a greater skill set to help a greater number of people. I can't tell you how many times in this past year I've noticed someone with unrelenting pain for several years also having gut issues. And because I don't have that skill set and I don't have someone who I can refer to, I can't help that person as best as I could. That's frustrating to me. Or you get someone who has a severely narrow palate, can't get any changes with any of the stuff that I do, and is in pain and also has trouble sleeping. Again, I wouldn't know to look to maybe say, hey, maybe you need to check out a dentist or an ENT if I didn't take PRI stuff. So I'm grateful for them for that. The second thing that I would say was my biggest takeaway is the importance of respiration and how that can influence so many things. I remember when I first got out of PT school, and even though I did an internship with Daddy Old Pops Bill Hartman, we were doing some of the respiratory stuff that we're doing, but it wasn't anywhere near the extent that we are now. And a lot of what we did was taking into account regional interdependence, but it was a lot of, you heard here, we're going to do these different manual techniques, let's see what happens, be on your way. And I found that while I got some decent results, they weren't great. And it wasn't really until I got into this respiratory stuff and appreciating the last point that I started to see the results come much quicker. And it's allowed me to get really good results when I can't put my hands on people, like the internet. So that was huge. And I still come back to respiration as the primary thing from a movement standpoint, because the body is going to figure out whatever it's the best way is possible to make sure adequate respiration is occurring. And that is at the expense of many systems. If we can utilize that respiratory mechanism to our advantage and put people into the opposite strategy of what they're currently utilizing, a strategy of minimal system variability or movement variability, then we have a fighting chance at getting people better. And we have a fighting chance at helping people who we didn't think we could initially if we're just looking at a joint-by-joint approach or a local testing approach. It has to be looking at someone from a total system perspective and a respiratory perspective, because to me, that's where we intervene best. The last thing that I learned was appreciating biomechanics and regional interdependence. I saw this patient this past week, and we have a PT student at the clinic right now. And she saw me because she had long-standing ankle pain. I believe she heard it last March or September. It's been a minute. It's been a hot minute that she's been in pain. And she has issues when she's sprinting because she plays softball. She has issues when she's jumping or doing any gymnastics. She has issues with pretty much anything explosive. And there was also pain with passive plantar flexion inversion. Now, she's seen some people in the past who've done some local stuff. No improvement. So what I did was I looked at her ankle, but I wasn't thinking about treating her ankle whatsoever. She had classic ankle sprain signs. She had a substantial amount of inversion and plantar flexion, more so than she did on the other side. Clearly some laxity present. But what I instead focused on was up top and what potential biomechanical influences the axial skeleton, the pelvis, and every joint above the ankle could do to perpetuate that ankle pain that she was having. And what I did was I gave her activities that addressed that. And after I did that, without doing anything to her ankle, I tested plantar flexion and inversion, which was painful. And after we did that, it was no longer painful. We have to think beyond one joint. We have to think of a movement system. We have to appreciate how interconnected everything is and how important it is to address movement variability and how maybe foot laxity can have an influence of something way up top, or something way up top can have an influence of way down low. We have to look at the individuals that we work with as an entire person, as a multi-system person, and we have to understand how the body moves as a cohesive unit in order to have maximal impact, especially when we're taking someone from the lowest level of rehab to the highest level performance. We can't bridge that gap until somewhere in the middle we have to appreciate the body moving as a unit. So I would say those are my 3 big takeaways from my PRI courses. I'm grateful I was exposed to a lot of their stuff, and I wish them well, and I hope they continue to grow as a company. So, great question, Max. Last question for today. Oh, this one, I love this one. This is from Artem. Sorry, I can't pronounce your name. Speaking of the draw-in maneuver, I'd love to hear you. We were emailing back and forth. We bros. Speaking of the draw-in maneuver, I'd love to hear you speak on the topic. I'm currently in PT school, and we are fed the idea that the abdominal draw-in maneuver is the panacea for all ailments. Quite infuriating. I agree. I have my own opinions on it, and my classmates think that I'm a hashtag hater. Hashtag haters gonna hate. I added that. Anyways, it'd be an interesting topic as it's still being taught in schools and widely used in clinics from what I've seen. Keep putting out the fantastic content, fam. I love it. Fam, recognize fam. This isn't the most offensive thing in rehab. There's more offensive things in the world that grind my gears. The opioid crisis, prime example. But this does grind my gears. Here's why. Let's talk about how the draw-in maneuver became a thing. You got to know your history, right, before you crush it, which I will today. So, Paul Hodges, I believe this was between 94 and 96. I'll see if I can find this study too. But he had the first thing where he measured people with and without low back pain. And basically what he did was he had them raise their arm really quickly, and they were measuring the transversus abdominis to see if there were any changes in the transversus abdominis with and without low back pain. Adrian Lowe told me a very funny joke about Paul. Anytime you go see Paul, you're supposed to say, "Hi, Paul." And the reason why you do that is because in that study, that's what people did while they measured the transversus abdominis. So if you ever meet Paul Hodges, you probably want to say hi to him like that. I haven't, but you know darn well I'm going to say hi to him like that when I see him. And he'll probably hate my guts. Can't please everybody. Hate is going to hate. So with that study, they found that there was a delay in the transversus abdominis firing with the arm raised in individuals with low back pain. Well, fam be going, oh, wow, that's really cool. Maybe we need to do some activities for the transversus abdominis. But that's not what my boy Paul Hodges said. In fact, I'll link this in the show notes, but I have a thing up right now. This was a YouTube video from 2015 where Paul Hodges is talking about balancing mobility and stability. And he has readily admitted that that's not what he was going for. Because people thought, oh, wow, this is cool. Maybe we should isolate the TRA. How do you do that? You draw in your abdominals and try to call that stability. False. Paul Hodges, the guy who did the original study, doesn't believe that. So what happened was there was this huge misinterpretation of the literature, and extrapolating this here, there's an alteration in the transversus abdominis firing to saying we need to isolate the transversus abdominis. And there's this huge disconnect. I think this is problematic for a multitude of reasons. One, I don't think it creates true stability because they're not saying what true stability is, and the people who advocate for the drawing maneuver do not get stability. When I think of stability, and what I mean by that is, let's say, for the sake of argument, stability is the ability to keep the spine safe under load. Well, the transversus abdominis is important in that. There's several other abdominal muscles that come into play. Moreover, there's also this thing called, intra-abdominal pressure. That's a big freaking deal. So here's how I can get stability. I take a breath of air in. The diaphragm descends. I get a 360-degree expansion of the abdominal cavity. And intra-abdominal pressure is maximized. That is how you create stability in that region. That's the normal respiratory mechanism. You throw a little Valsalva maneuver on that bad boy, then you get maximal intrathorax pressure. You got stability from here all the way to here. You can move some heavy things, fam. You ain't gonna be doing that with a drawing. That is how I envision you achieving stability. And what's really important, well, one, with the drawing maneuver, when I'm doing this and I'm sucking my gut in, I don't get that 360-degree expansion. I can't get intra-abdominal pressure. And the reason why I can't develop intra-abdominal pressure, try taking a breath in there, is because the big thing that moves, that no one's talking about, when the diaphragm descends and you get this 360-degree expansion here and actually into the pelvic floor, what do you think is creating that 360-degree expansion? It's the guts. And I ain't talking about the Nickelodeon show, fam. The intestines, the goods. Those things are what push out into the abdominal wall and the posterior abdominal wall. Mike, I will link a, hang on one second. Mike asked a question about the infrasternal angle. Mike, I will link a debrief on that, but basically Mike is asking how I assess the infrasternal angle. I take my thumbs, put them on the xiphoid, and do that. There's your answer. Back to what I was saying. The guts are what push into the abdominal wall and push down into the pelvic floor. If you're walking around, you're doing this, you're sucking in your gut, and you're trying to lift some heavy things, where the hell are the guts going to go? They ain't going nowhere. You can't get intra-abdominal pressure because the guts can't push into anything because you've essentially compressed them by sucking in and doing your little drawing maneuver, thinking you're getting gains. You ain't getting gains. That's the key, guys. It's the guts mobilizing against the abdominal wall and into the pelvic floor that creates pressure near the lumbar spine to ensure stability when you're lifting something heavy. Done. That's it. It has nothing to do with the drawing maneuver. Moreover, try breathing when you're trying to hollow in your belly. We know that respiration is important. There's a lot of research out there showing that if you don't breathe, you die. You can't get an adequate breath to establish a Valsalva maneuver when you're drawing in. We need to put this to rest. This is not helping people. It is not useful. You are not going to be using that when you are lifting something heavy. When your son or your daughter is stuck under the car and you got to lift up the car to save their lives. You think the PT instructor is going to be drawn in their gut? No. They're going to take a big breath in. They're going to brace. They're going to lift that bad boy. Save the kid. You have to get a big breath. Brace if you need to, if you absolutely need to. Valsalva. That's how you're going to get stability. It's not going to be a drawing maneuver. So I think that's what we need to be teaching. I think we need to put this to rest because it is a misinterpretation of the research. And it's sad for me to hear that when I know when I was in PT school, because this was taught as well, we had this big discussion oftentimes about doing things evidence-based. And I remember, and I will say I was partially to blame, or not full, extreme ownership, I was fully to blame. I was doing Turkish get-ups with someone, and I couldn't adequately articulate why I was doing them. This was outside of PT school. This was when I went to my residency. And there was all this talk about evidence-based practice. And it is clear, based on the literature, and based on what Paul Hodges, the guy who basically started this whole cascade, says, that this is a gross misinterpretation of the literature. They're extrapolating things that are just not practical, one, are not coherent with the literature, two, and three, don't work. Because you're not going to be drawing in when you're under load. You're not going to be drawing in when you're playing at the highest level of sport. So let's put the kielbasa on this. Let's put it to rest. Let's get our people better by teaching some breathing, by teaching intra-abdominal pressure, by getting a 360-degree inhale. Brace if you need to. Hold your breath. Lift some heavy things, and you ought to be in business. And I think that's a good stopping point for tonight. I want to thank you beautiful, sexy people for tuning in to episode number 42. I got one more of these in Page America, episode 43, and then they're all going to be recording live from somewhere else. Stay tuned. I'm sure you're wondering, though, Zach, you are so cool. You look so good in coral shirts. Where can I learn more about you? I'll tell you. First, go to ZachCouples.com. What you want to do while you're there is subscribe to my newsletter. You're going to click on ZachCouples.com, and you're going to see, oh, that's a nice little, logo that he has. Go down, go to the right. It's right there. Put in your name, put in your email, and here's what you're going to get. You're going to get 3 hours of me talking about pain, talking about breathing. You're going to get 50 pages of notes with that. You have to, Jay Burr. You got to subscribe to that, fam. Goddamn. You're going to do that, and you're also going to get weekend learning goodies. Guess what? I got new ones coming out Friday. You're going to get 4 or 5 links, depending on my mood, of what I am learning about on the interwebs and not on the interwebs. Definitely check it out. Subscribe to the newsletter. Also, while you're there, you'll want to click on my online services page. From there, I can do 3 things for you. The first will be online movement consultations. You're a little toyed, maybe you're not moving as well as you'd like to. You got some boo-boos, and you saw some practitioners, and it's like, yeah, I'm all right, but I'm not all right. Maybe, if you moved a little bit better, you might be a little bit less achy. You might be able to get down into the deadlift from the floor. Talk to me. We'll work together. I'm going to assess just about everything on you. Not everything. That could be a lawsuit. I'm going to assess just about everything on you. We're going to restore your movement capabilities. And then you're going to go out and crush life. Sign up for a movement consultation with me. Once you're like, wow, Zach, that was a lot of fun. How do I do that with my fam? Then you want to go to the mentorship section. Click on that, and we'll talk back and forth about how I make decisions, how some of this variability stuff can help your clients. Maybe you just want to organize it a little bit better, because I help a lot of people with that. You'd be surprised. Hit me up for the mentorship section. And then you're like, oh man, okay, I'm doing my thing. I'm practicing pretty good, I'm moving pretty well. How do I get gains? Why are you asking me? Of course you want to go to the online fitness training section, because guess what we'll do? We'll work together to design you a program to help you reach your goals. What I'll do is I'll give you another movement consultation. We will see what your movement repertoire looks like. I'll design a program specific to your needs to help you reach your goals. We'll talk week to week saying, hey, how's this going? Do we need to make this adjustment? Do we need to make that adjustment? And we'll help you get you where you need to be. Definitely check me out on the online fitness training. You've scoured ZachCouples.com. You have read all of my posts, and you're still hungry for more. Then what you'll want to do is subscribe to my show, the Zach Couples Show, on iTunes. Because guess what, people? There's 41 other movement debriefs that you probably haven't listened to if you're just tuning in. You definitely want to check me out. Bring me with you on trips. I'm great. I don't say much. Actually, I say a lot if you're listening to me on the podcast. Sign up I'm either on iTunes or either on Stitcher. Search the Zach Couples Show, and you can listen to me whenever you'd like. Please also send reviews, because I need the fam to be bigger. You know this. Fam recognize fam. Definitely hit me up on those domains. Once you're done with that, you know where you're going to want to go next. You're going to go to Facebook.com/Z Couples. I post things. I'm posting some videos now. We're getting some good discussions with some of the exercise selections that I've been utilizing. Definitely hit me up there. You'll also want to go to Twitter. My handle is @ZCouples. Definitely hit me up on Twitter. I tweet things, stuff like that. And then last but not least, no, actually, that's not last but not least. Before we go to last but not least, you'll definitely want to hit me up on that Instagram, baby. Instagram.com, Zach, Z-A-C, Couples, C-U-P-P-L-E-S. I post pictures, things like that. Probably want to check me out and give it a shot. Last but not least, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Well, yeah, I put a lot of exercises on there. Like if I'm doing something with a movement consultation online, I, cook up a little bit of something new and improved, and it helps someone. Well, by golly, Bo's is going to be on there. You'll definitely want to check that out. Maybe try out the exercise, see if it works for you and your fam. Otherwise, I want to thank all of you beautiful, sexy people for tuning in. It's been a phenomenal 42 episodes with you all. You're wonderful. I appreciate you. Fam will always recognize fam. I hope you keep it real, but not to the extent where things go wrong. Stay hungry, stay learning, stay moving, and I'll see you next time. Deuces.